Hello, and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the great and distinguished honor of having with me Dr. Sonia Soltero, who is a professor and chair of the Department of Leadership, Language, and Curriculum at DePaul University in Chicago. A former bilingual education teacher and dual language coordinator, Dr. Soltero teaches and publishes research on bilingual and dual language education. Dr. Sonia Soltero, who are you?
Well, first of all, good morning, Dr. Martinez, and thank you for the invitation. Are you there?
Yeah, I am.
So sorry.
It's
Technology,
okay.
we love technology, but we also hate it. So thank you again for inviting me. Who am I? Well, first and foremost, I'm an educator at heart and in practice. I have been an educator and involved in education since I was 21, after I graduated. And so my heart and my soul are in the field of education. I was a teacher, I'm a professor. It's my life's work. And in particular, I'm a bilingual educator. And my life and my work is also around advocating for and helping and researching and professional development and all of those things that entail our advocacy work towards getting bilingual education to be uh, important in the field of education.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. As a school principal in a school with a significant dual language program, I am highly interested in asking you questions about it. But for starters, can you walk us through your professional trajectory up to this point?
Certainly. So when I was in high school and before high school, I grew up in Latin America, and I wanted to be an architect. And when I was very young, I got dissuaded from following that goal and that dream in my life to do that. And instead, I was sort of steered away from being an architect, which in retrospect, I shouldn't have been. And I'll talk about that later. And I decided to go into education as people were steering me towards that. I'm good with children and all those things that we sometimes get. And I sort of fell in love with deaf education, deaf and hard of hearing education. And so I went to the University of Arizona to pursue a degree in deaf and hard of hearing education and getting a degree in that. But I soon found out that I was quite bad at sign language. And so I tried my best. I love sign language, but I was just not good at it. So I decided, well, I'll just go into general education. I really had no sense of bilingual education. I was bilingual. I grew up in Latin America. I'm biliterate. And then I just fell into bilingual education just by happenstance. And it was coincidence, accidentally. I graduated from the University of Arizona with a gen ed degree, and I immediately got a job because I was bilingual. And my friends who had graduated and were not bilingual were struggling a little bit. They were substitutes, etc. And so I ended up getting hired at the best school that I could have gotten hired at. It was just serendipitous because I ended up teaching and got a job 1 week before classes began. I was 21 at the Pascua Yaqui Native American Reservation in Tucson, Arizona. And so within the first week, I was overwhelmed, but I fell in love with the students. I fell in love with the families, with the community, with teaching, and with bilingual education because I was teaching a very interesting population of students who mostly were Yaqui, Pascua Yaqui Native American. And the Yaqui tribe, I don't know if you're aware, is a tribe that is split between the southern part of Arizona and the northern part of Mexico.
Mm.
And so in the US side, the Yaqui tribe mostly speaks Spanish and English, very little Yoeme, which is the language, Yaqui. But in the Mexican side, it's mostly Yoeme and Spanish. So I just then I thought, well, I don't really know what I'm doing because I did gen ed, and I pursued my master's degree and my PhD at the University of Arizona in bilingual education, and I worked with some really prominent scholars in the field, Richard Rees and Rees Moll and Yetta Goodman and Ken Goodman and others, and that just shaped everything came together very accidentally. And so then I moved to Chicago, and I was a Chicago public school teacher and also a dual language coordinator for a while. Um, and I got a job. I applied and got a job at DePaul University after I earned my doctorate. And I've been at DePaul University for 24 years now, doing teacher preparation, but also principal and administrative preparation around bilingual education, English language learners, issues around Latino education and immigration. And so I've my soul is still in the classroom. And so even though I do a lot of research and I publish and I do many things, the classroom is really my home, and bilingual education is my home.
Thank you so much for sharing all that story. I am highly curious. What um what would you say were the major differences between how you taught and the schools in Arizona with that reservation tribe and what you found here in Chicago?
So in the Southwest, it's predominantly Latino Mexican, or it was when I was there. I think it's more diverse now, and there is a lot of history, of course, because Arizona was part of Mexico. So there's a big influence around Mexican history and culture, and even the Yaqui, the Yoeme tribe, is part. There's that very Mexican association with the Yoeme tribe, and so the school that I was in, Tucson, Arizona, was it shifted between the number one and the number two most needy, quote unquote, school, high poverty community, lots of trauma and other issues. And so it had a lot of funding, but it was always a struggle to really do education per the community and being culturally and linguistically responsive to the community. When I came to Chicago, it was, of course, very urban setting, and I had students that I never had before. I had Mexican descent students and also Puerto Rican students. And because we were doing dual language in Chicago, in the Chicago school where I was working, African American children who were in the two-way dual language program. And so
Yes.
I had to shift very quickly, and I relied on the students. And even though I was teaching 5-year-olds, I was teaching kindergarten and I did second grade for a little bit, relied on the students and the community and the families to educate me around sort of differences between my context that I was in Tucson and the context here in Chicago. So I relied on the families and I relied on the community and my peers who were teaching in the school and had been senior teachers. And so for me, I don't know how anybody can say they're not a lifelong learner, even though that's a cliche, but we don't know everything and we're always learning. So
Mhm.
it enriched my background and experiences, and I learned so much from being in those two similar but very different contexts.
Beautiful. You mentioned dual language in Chicago and trying to make the math here. Dual language has different waves throughout the years. What
Yes.
should the average listener should know about dual language in Chicago?
So dual language in Chicago, as you said, has had these cycles of initiatives that have come and gone. So it has a long history in Chicago. And as everybody knows, I think you should know, Inter-American Magnet School was the first. It was created by a group of parents, and it's been around since the 60s. And so there is a long, rich history of dual language. And every so often, every so many years or decades, there's a cycle of reinitiating dual language. It happened a couple of times, and the last time when I was here as a teacher, it happened under Paul Vallas, who was the CEO. It began with 31 schools, and but it began in the middle of the year. So a lot of misconceptions about how to do this right. And so a lot of those 31 schools didn't do very well because of the lack of planning and the lack of understanding of what dual language is and what it takes. And so after that, the next cycle was to about 2008 with the Buell Commission, which was the Bilingual Education World Language Commission, that was a directive from the board at that time, which was wonderful. Like the board was buying into dual language and understanding why that's important. And the Mayor Daley at the time, was also very supportive of seeing Chicago and putting Chicago forth as a global multilingual, multicultural a city of the world. And so that, of course, goes line and very much hand in hand with bilingualism, multilingualism, and embracing linguistic diversity and embracing cultural diversity. So the for your audience and the audience that is listening today and listening later, is the linguistic capital that Chicago and the U.S. has should not be squandered. We have, whether people like it or not, we have a multilingual country in the U.S. And why squander that linguistic capital away, but not promote it and develop it in schools? Because one thing is to be bilingual, which we can be in our communities and our families, etc. But another whole thing is to become biliterate. And that biliterate component, being able to read and write in two languages, and also being able to process concepts in math and social studies and history and science in two languages, that really is developed academically in school over a long period of time. And so we really should, in the current context of sort of like a global economy, to provide opportunities for all students to develop biliteracy and multiliteracies. It's easier said than done.
For sure.
That requires bilingual teachers, which we're always struggling to get bilingual teachers, and there's a big gap. But why not tap into that great linguistic capital that we have already, with students earning their seal of biliteracy, providing the education, the bilingual education and the world language education, and tap into those students who graduate with a seal of biliteracy and have that pipeline of teachers. Of course, we both know, and everybody knows, how difficult it is to be a teacher, and how difficult it has been for the last probably 15 years or more. Not just the pandemic, but teacher bashing, and the high stakes accountability systems that are really very punitive. And so teachers leave the profession or don't go. The young people don't go into the teaching profession. We need to remedy that, and remedy quickly, because it's a national crisis.
Amen. Especially with the immigration crisis of so many people coming not only from Latin America but all over the world. We need teachers who are supported not only by the education systems but also by the society. Let me ask you, Sonia, how was your transition from being on the trenches as a teacher, doing language coordinator, and passing to academia? What anecdotes should we know about?
Yeah, so it was never my intention. Like, it was never my intention to be a bilingual teacher, and then it came to pass. Somebody once told me, Sonia, what are your ambitions, professional ambitions? And I thought that that question was so strange. I don't have ambitions. I have things that I pursue because I enjoy. And so there's not a goal at the end of the line. And so, as a teacher, I was always attracted to get a job, and because I was bilingual by literate, I could have my choice of schools. Um, and that's why I would recommend anybody to become bilingual if you're not, or to pursue
Yes.
that, and so that you have more doors that are open to you. But I always wanted to seek schools, and I worked in schools that had a strong partnership with universities. I did that in Tucson, Arizona, in the schools that I worked in Tucson. They had very strong partnerships with the University of Arizona. I was part of the Luis Moll Funds of Knowledge project when I was a teacher. And by the way, Luis Moll just passed away. I don't know if you're familiar with him and his Funds of
I,
Knowledge research.
I have
Yeah,
heard of him.
yeah. He passed away, unfortunately, last month. And then when I came to Chicago, I did the same. I wanted to be in a school that had a strong partnership with a university. And I also taught as an adjunct faculty in the evening. So I was always somehow connected to the university life. And then when I came full time to university, and still 24 years later, I very much remember what it was like to sit as a teacher, as an educator in in-service classes at the university, and that's how I teach. That's how I interact with my students. And once they graduate, they become my colleagues of sorts,
Yes.
right? And so I also must say that my experience as a kindergarten teacher in academia has been very useful
Oh,
because like in any organization, there are always sort of tensions that you have to navigate, and there are personalities, and so I taught kindergarten with 32 5-year-olds. So I'm not calling adults 5-year-olds, but that experience. Remember that person that said, "All I learned in kindergarten." I can't remember the name. And so, and I learned as a kindergarten teacher, and so I love teaching kindergarten, and I miss that. But teaching adults and interacting with adults and helping them become um, more 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 experienced, but also more knowledgeable, and seeing them grow, it's amazing. But then when they leave the university, and I hear from them 10 years later, and they come to say, "Oh, I'm now a principal, or I'm now in a leadership position around else," and it's just uh, I see them as my children. I don't know. I see
love
them as,
it.
yeah, my colleagues, but also I have a very close connection to the wonderful work that a lot of my students are now doing.
Beautiful. I really appreciate that. There's many professors, but it's only the ones that truly care that are the special ones. So thank you for sharing that. Let me ask you, like in Back to the Future, if you could go back in any point of your professional trajectory, what would the Sonia of today tell the Sonia of back then?
Um, well, don't be dissuaded by those who want to dissuade you from following and pursuing your goals and your dreams. Um, Something else that this is like by serendipitous happenstance, I fell into many things is to try new things that you don't think you would like or that you were never interested in. Because sometimes we have a particular perception about other things that are professions or careers or activities or engaging with communities that we may not have a lot of interest in, and then we discover that we do. And then sometimes we discover that we don't. And something else is to be patient with yourself and with others. As a teacher, and even here, and as a teacher in K-12, but also as a teacher in higher ed, we lose sight of that ability to be patient, the ability to give grace to yourself and to others. Um, teachers, I think in education, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves.
Hmm.
And part of the reason why we then just burn out and then leave the profession, or become jaded. And so we need to sort of parse out the things that are beyond our control and the things that are within our control. And there's a lot beyond our control, but there are those things that we can control in the moment. And the advocacy part is very critical. Um, and I was going to say this later, but the advocacy part cannot be an individual pursuit. It has to be a collective pursuit. There are many other people that want to do advocacy, and so surround yourself with people that want to engage in that advocacy with you. Um, because by yourself, we all have strength in numbers, right?
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Soltero. So let me ask you, as you know, reading books is such a luxury. I am very curious if you had to give two books, one fiction and one nonfiction, to a loved one. Which books will those be?
So it's very hard to pick one book. But I can tell you that the books, I have many books. I love books. I'm a bibliophile, as you can see from behind.
For sure.
The books that impacted me when I was a child, there are two fiction books, El Principito, The
Mm.
Little Prince, and then later on, well, El Principito is one, but in Latin America, and I don't know if you read Platero y Yo,
But
which is about a little donkey.
Jimenez, right?
Yeah,
Platero,
yeah,
yeah.
a little
Uh-huh.
donkey, and the friendship the donkey has with this little boy, and the adventures and all of that. Those are two books that I always give to my friends' kids and my nephews and my nieces to read. And as an adult, I think Cien Años de Soledad,
Mm.
100 Years of Solitude, is one of my favorite books. In terms of fiction and nonfiction. There's so many, but I would recommend two. One that had made great impact. It's been around a long time. Jonathan Cosel's Savage Inequalities. When I read that a long time ago, it really shook me because of the inequalities in funding and how schools are funded and how they're set up to fail, the ones that are underfunded. And then the other book that I would recommend for those who are in the bilingual education field is anything by Francois Grosjean. But the two are Life with Two Languages and Life as a Bilingual. If you are bilingual yourself, or even if you're not, or multilingual, these are really very interesting. He's a very interesting author to read. He's very amenable and reader friendly.
Ooh, now I have new choices here. You know, they are making Netflix is making a series of 100 Years of Solitude,
Oh,
y me parece que en español.
qué bien.
So I'm really looking forward to see that one, to see vis-a-vis the book. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Let's talk about who is or who are your biggest influences.
I already mentioned two in my professional life. The people that really influenced my trajectory very early on were Richard Ruiz, who was my dissertation chair, and I took a lot of classes with him at the University of Arizona. Luis Moll as well, who became a friend when I lived there. The Goodmans, Yetta and Kat Goodman, who were sort of the mom and dad of whole language. And then, of course, so I've been involved in the reading wars for a long time. The whole language, or now it's the balanced literacy versus the phonics approach. And then later, as I became more engaged in the field, the one person that I really look up to, and she's a friend, and she just gave her last presentation at age 90. Lily Wong Fillmore, who's from Berkeley. She's retired professor emerita, and others, many others in the field of bilingual education, Cristina Alfaro and Rebecca Martin, Blue Martin Martinez, and others that inspired me, taught me so much, and I admire their work and their fortitude for staying in the fight with younger generations of scholars and educators.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. That's such a library of influences. That's awesomeness. Let me ask you one more question in the section of wisdom of this show. How do you address or deal with imposter syndrome?
So, imposter syndrome is an interesting concept in terms of those who, because there is something to be said that there are some imposters that pose, as we know, as educators or leaders in education, and they've never been in a classroom a day in their lives. And so there is, a genuine imposter thing, but the imposter syndrome in terms of feeling inadequacy or feeling that we don't measure up, or I think for me and for us, and what I tell my students is that we need to surround ourselves with people that you admire and people that you can learn from. I've always surrounded myself, I always want to learn. So I surround myself with people that I can learn from, and that also you have trust in those people that you have admiration for and that you can learn from. But that trust is very important because that's the trust where you can seek advice and you know that it's not just going to be genuine advice that you get and feedback, but it's also going to be coming from a good place, not a place of competitiveness or anything else. So I'm always also seeking for advice because I'm always self-aware and try to be self-aware and self-reflective about my flaws and where I can improve. It seems that that's a skill that we have to develop. That is not easy to engage in all the time, but I think we need to do that. That's how we grow as human beings, as professionals, as people that others perhaps may want to seek for advice, and knowing that they can be trusted and that you can be somebody who provides. I like frankness and I like genuine advice rather than I don't want to hear I'm great. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear where are the areas that I can be better, because that's growth, and we grow forever until the end of our lives. We're always learning and growing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I always tell my students, Michael Jordan never stops practicing.
Right.
Um, Beautiful. And let's take a quick pause to celebrate the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
So, Sonia, as you know, to be successful, it includes being on top of our productivity, but this looks different for different people. You are a professor, a scholar, a chair of a department. How do you get organized? Tell us about how do you do your work?
So I always go to categorize and prioritize. So create lists, create buckets of so many things that we have to do personally and professionally. So I always think in terms of short term and the immediate, the things that I have to do today or tomorrow, that are due today or tomorrow. And then short term in terms of prioritizing that list of things that need to be done and how they interconnect with each other or not, and then create long-term plans. The things that, for example, when I've written 3 books. I'm already thinking about my 4th book when I get some things off my plate. But thinking about and categorizing those things, like writing a book, what are the steps? Otherwise, we tend to get overwhelmed, not just by all the things that are on our plate, but also how to take on a new project or a large project like writing a book or something like, pursuing a doctorate. When you have family and you have to work, and So how do you organize yourself? And some people have the talent to do that, an innate talent for being organized, and others don't. So when you don't have innate talent, surround yourself with people that do, and sort of take note of what are the best practices around um, organizing and prioritizing and categorizing. I also always look for and try to accomplish or tackle the things that are low hanging fruit, what I call low hanging fruit, things that are easier to do than not, and things that can be done that I can do by myself versus things that I need others to work with me on. And that takes more organization and coordination about timing and calendars and schedules and things like that. So it's prioritizing, categorizing, putting things in buckets, and a calendar. Or if I lose I have my iPad, my Outlook calendar, and everything's written there. If I lose that, my life is over. But yes, that's how I tackle trying to organize and not feel overwhelmed, which from time to time I do.
For sure. But let's get geeky and technical. So you mentioned Outlook for your calendar, your to-do list, and your list. Do you do it by hand in a notebook? Do you have an app? What do you do?
So I have this app that I love, and let me check what the name is. It's called Good Notes.
Ooh,
And Good Notes, sorry about that.
that's okay.
It's wonderful. So you can create notebooks, and you can create just a note that then you can discard. You can color code. You can move things around. It's done with one of those Apple Pens.
Mhm.
It's really, really helpful. And then my Outlook calendar, I have also color coding by calendars, things that I have to do. I also put in my calendar anything that has to be that I'm about to do. For example, if I have a professional development session, I put the date of that professional development session in my calendar. But then before that, 3-4 weeks before that, I also put it in my weekend and put a red bullet or dot, or I don't know what it's called, a circle after it, so that I know those are things that I have to do rather than things that I have scheduled to do. So that's the preparation by putting a red dot after the name of that particular calendar item.
Beautiful. When you write articles or books, do you put music? Do you put candles? What do you do to get in the zone and do that art?
So writing is, I've written a lot, but it's not easy. You have to get in, sort of get in the mood, but get in the rhythm. And writer's block is a thing where you sit and you just, it's just not coming. And so you have to get up and move around and go and then come back. And there are some days that it just won't come. My preference and the way that I work in writing is that I need big chunks of time. I'm not the type of person, some people that can write an hour and then do a bunch of things the rest of the day. I need a big chunk of time, 6 to 8 hours. And so when I've written my books and when I write my articles, I purposefully clear my calendar, usually on weekends, or other parts of my day, and a big chunk of time, minimum 5 hours. So that's
Mm.
how long it takes me to get going. And then once I get going, I go in terms of writing and the ideas and how to put the thoughts together and organize the content and all of that. When I wrote my dissertation, I also had all weekend, Saturday and Sunday, 8 hours both days, and I dedicated my entire time to that only. So I can't take distractions when I'm doing this, because you're kind of in the zone, and
Mhm.
that's all you're thinking about, and that's how your creative juices flow. And no music. And I do. It's very distracting to have emails, so I turn it off. I turn off email on my computer or my laptop. I turn off the phone, and because very easy to, okay, let me check what that email is about, um,
Wow.
and
So if
have
you like silence, I just took my son to a college campus tour, and they had these pods that when you close yourself inside, is complete silence, like this, and you can yell all you want, and
nice,
nobody will hear you.
nice.
So that's interesting. So you feel that without any sound, is that you're in your best element
I am. Sometimes I put, because if I put any music that has words,
Oh
I
yeah.
start listening to the words. So, wanted to sing the words. So sometimes I do put some music that they don't have lyrics. But it, for me, in writing, that's the music in my head, because
I like
you
that.
get into a rhythm of writing and thinking and writing, and then going back and editing, and so that's the music in my head.
And when you write, do you use Google Doc, a Word document, Scrivener? What do you use?
Old-fashioned Word documents, and then I have piles of books everywhere that and note post-it notes that I then can reference quickly. I also now, which is so different, when I wrote my dissertation, one has access to PDFs, not books, but PDF articles. So I have several files where I have categorized the articles around their topics. So, and I make sure, and this is a tip, that when I'm using references, I immediately put the reference in the text and in the reference section so that I don't forget. Because that's something that we tend to, like, oh, I'll do that later, but then it becomes overwhelming. You can't remember the references that were used, and because when we paraphrase, we have to give credit to the source to
Mm,
ensure it. So there's sort of
beautiful.
like a whole process of doing.
For sure. So you're reading something, and do you suddenly say, "Oh, I know I'm gonna use this"? So you mark it with a post-it
Yes,
because you know you're gonna use in that section.
I
Okay.
mark with a post-it in the book, but then I make a note in the Word document
Ah,
so that I remember that, oh, there was that particular book that had that particular content that I want to use. So I have to reference in my Word document to make sure that I remember to go back to that book, not some other book, and the page
beautiful.
number and all of that.
And how do you? What is your process of setting up PD presentations and or lectures? Do you, I don't know, you visualize yourself and what you're gonna, your audience? What advice do you have?
So I always ask about the audience so that I can tailor what I'm going to say and the types of slides. I do PowerPoints because I couldn't be an architect. I spend a lot of time doing architecture with my PowerPoint slides. So I always start with a blank PowerPoint. I don't like to use the templates and all that. And so I try to make those PowerPoints as visually appealing, but also content appealing as possible. And so that's how I tailor the presentation. For example, if I'm presenting to leadership versus teachers in high school versus teachers in primary grades, sometimes teachers are K-12. And so all those things have to be taken into account when I'm tailoring. Maybe the content is the same, but I have to maybe use different examples. So through those PowerPoints, I try to make it interactive as well. That's why I don't give out my handouts before time, even in my class or when I'm doing professional development, because the content, there's this, I try to create this, what's coming next. So this kind of interest from the audience that I don't know what she's going to say next. I don't know what the next slide is going to say. And so that people are connected rather than providing the handout, and they know what's coming. And if when I engage the audience, well, a lot of the answers are in the handout. So
Beautiful.
That's why I don't give, I give the handout out. And some people don't like that because they want to take notes and all of that. But once I explain why I don't do it, then they understand.
Makes sense. And I like that because it makes the class or the professional development
Yeah.
interesting. So you mentioned at some point that before you transition into academia, you adjuncted. For those of us who would like to do that step at some point from the school setting to adjuncting and eventually professors, what makes a good adjunct? What type of adjunct universities want?
So adjuncts with experience is very valuable, but not just experience. I mean, experience in the field. Of course, experience adjuncting is wonderful too, but somebody who has real deep content knowledge. And so sometimes that content knowledge is developed. When I first started adjuncting, I had content knowledge, but once I started preparing, I realized, oh, I need to know more because this course goes much more in depth. So the way that I developed deeper content knowledge is by preparing for the class, reading beyond the classroom assigned readings, beyond that, so that I actually could, my repertoire of the content knowledge was expanded beyond the readings for the class. And so somebody also who's very organized, the key thing with students is responsiveness. And it becomes much more challenged than when I was a student because of email and texting and all that. So also parameters. So I always encourage when I hire new adjuncts, I provide them tips that I follow, which are, I tell the students that from Friday at 5 o'clock till Monday morning, I don't look at my email, because otherwise the students have expectations that we're on 24/7, and we're not. It's a job that we have. Um, some faculty don't care about answering emails on the weekends, but so you also have to have that type of understanding about how university is different sometimes from the K-12 world. So somebody with not only content knowledge and experience, but somebody who's willing to put in at first more time into getting deeper content knowledge.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's such a great advice. I appreciate it. Sonia, when you don't have the hat of professor and writer, professional development provider, how do you take care of yourself? Any mindful activities, exercise? What do you do?
I have to do more of that because I kind of do work 24/7, which is not very healthy to do. But I think somebody asked me, I think my mother asked me, well, why you? I love what I do. But it is all consuming and it shouldn't be. And so there should be some work-life balance. When I do get away, I really get away and I travel with my husband. We like to travel, see new places and disconnect, which is something that I advise everybody to do. You don't realize until you disconnect how much you needed that.
Amen.
But part of my problem is that I really love what I do. And so it gets away from you and you become a workaholic, which is not very healthy.
Well, you never work. Then, if it is your passion, if it is your hobby, then that sounds like a lot of fun to me.
Yeah. I told my husband, the moment that I don't like what I'm doing, then if I stop liking being a professor at university, and then I'll retire and do something else. And so I'm very aware of that. As long as I love what I do, then I put in the hours because I enjoy it.
Beautiful. Awesome. It's such a luxury having you in the show, Dr. Soltero. Any last thoughts for the listeners and viewers of the show?
Yes, I want to share, and I forgot to share earlier that I'm very, very excited. More work. We've just, DePaul University has just established a partnership with Chicago Public Schools and with ALSE, the Office of Language, Culture, and Cultural Education, around increasing the number of bilingual and ESL endorsed teachers. And the whole thing began with a very organic, in the fall, the newcomers, what can DePaul do? What can we do? We started a meeting with the great Dr. Karime Asaf, and she's a graduate of DePaul.
Viva
And,
Karime. Yes.
and I offered to do, and I did some pro bono professional development, but what else can we do? And so we now have cohorts of teachers coming to DePaul. We have a cohort of Network 4. We're doing it on site at Blaine. And we're going to have a whole cohort of psychologists, speech pathologists, counselors who only need the bilingual assessment course to get the ESL endorsement. And so that is very exciting, because every single educator and non-educator, like a psychologist or a nurse, etc., will have children, especially now, who come from a language other than English and a culture other than the mainstream US culture. So
That's
very excited
awesome.
about that.
Beautiful. That sounds quite exciting. There's definitely a huge need all over the state in our nation. Very grateful that people have people like you teaching them and guiding them towards success.
Well, thank you for all you do and for doing these podcasts on your time off. This is very valuable.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Have a fantastic weekend.
You too. Thank you. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez.
Chulo.
And I love that production. Chill out.